Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's 7 o'clock somewhere, and I'm calling to order this meeting of the Planning and Development Council of the Town of Oakville. And oh, actually, Madam Clerk, this is minutes from last time. So I'm going to ask first, here, we'll get there. Bear with us. I think what the first thing to do is ask you for your, we have regrets from Councillor O'Meara, by the way, and he regrets that he's home ill. And here we go. Declarations of pecuniary interest are next on the list, and Councillor Lapworth, the chair recognizes you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I wish to restate my declaration of pecuniary interest. As one of my income tax clients is an employee of the Club League Corporation and works at the Glen Abbey Golf Club. And as this affects all of the items on tonight's agenda, I would request to leave the meeting.
I think that would be a good idea. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, the next item to occupy us is to I'd entertain a motion and a second to form as a committee of the whole. Councillor Lischina and Councillor Adams, all in favor? And that carries. So we have now proceeded into the committee of the whole session, which allows us a relaxed set of rules and greater ability to hear from the public. The first agenda item, in fact, all three of the public items on the agenda tonight concern Glen Abbey, and they're not technically the same thing as a public information report that we do on planning applications, where we take questions from council and we hear from the public, and then at a later date we have a recommendation report. But it's very similar in that the action tonight for these is to receive them, and then a period of public consultation is going to begin. And we expect to have them back before us, I believe, Madam Commissioner, in January. So there you go. That, I hope, sets the table for what we're doing tonight. The first item is the Cultural Heritage Landscape Conservation Plan for the Glen Abbey property. And if you'll give your attention to Susan Chaffert, she will catch up the public on this. I'm pretty sure that Ms. Chaffert will catch everyone up from the very beginning on this. When you designate a property as heritage, we wind up needing a management plan that will preserve the heritage elements. And so we've been saying this is coming for quite some number of months, and the draft of it is now before us. Ms. Chaffert.
Thank you, Your Worship, and members of council. I'm actually going to try to do a 2-for-1 special deal presentation for you tonight, rolling in the draft Cultural Heritage Landscape Plan for the Glen Abbey property, but also to touch on the draft Cultural Heritage Landscape Conservation Plan bylaw that is the following item on your agenda. As well, the two items are separate, they are related, and so I'm going to give a presentation that encompasses both, but I've got Mr. Perlin here to rely on to answer questions about specifically the Conservation Plan bylaw, and I'll be happy to field any questions that council may have about the Conservation Plan itself. So, Your Worship, as you noted, I will give you a little bit of a background. I'm not going all the way back this time, as Council has seen quite a few reports about cultural heritage landscapes over the past few months specifically. But what I will start with is the actions that have happened following the acceptance of Phase 2 of the implementation of the Cultural Heritage Landscape Strategy that happened in May. And in May, Council directed that 4 properties would be proceeding to Phase 3, the implementation of protection measures through the Cultural Heritage Landscape Strategy, with the highest priority being given to the Glen Abbey property. And so what has happened since then, just as a refresher, is that back in August we did issue a notice of intention to designate for the cultural heritage landscape of the Glen Abbey property. On September 26th, Council adopted an official plan amendment to the Livable Oakville plan, specifically regarding the cultural heritage policies in Section 5 of the Livable Oakville plan, that gives the town more direction on how to conserve significant cultural heritage landscapes, and also gives direction on the creation of cultural heritage landscape conservation plans. More recently, just last week, in fact, December, you saw the site-specific zoning bylaw amendment for the Glen Abbey property, and that brings us to this evening, where we're here at a special Planning and Development Council meeting to look at the draft conservation plan bylaw, the draft conservation plan itself, and then my colleague Leslie will follow up with the Cultural Heritage Special Policy Areas Official Plan Amendment after I finish up here. And so I'm going to take this slightly out of order and just give you a very brief overview of the draft Cultural Heritage Landscape Conservation Plan bylaw, and that was distributed as an attachment just today to Council. I believe there is a hard copy waiting for you here, and there are additional hard copies available, I believe, for members of the public. To give you a very high-level overview, the intent and purpose of the bylaw is to promote the conservation of cultural heritage resources by authorizing the preparation, approval, administration, and enforcement of conservation plans specifically for cultural heritage landscapes located on protected heritage property in the town. There's a lot of definitions that follow in Part 1 that touch on a number of items in that statement, including protected heritage property, which I'm sure you can all refer to in the attached bylaw. Part 2 of the bylaw, I would say, provides the most meat. It talks about the application of the bylaw and prohibitions. And so it begins by stating, again, that all cultural heritage landscapes contained in or included on protected heritage properties in the town are subject to the application of this bylaw. And then that any alterations of these cultural heritage landscapes shall be done in accordance with the conservation plan and any other requirements that the town has under Section 33 of the Ontario Heritage Act, which deals with the alteration of heritage properties. The plan states that no person shall alter a protected heritage property with a CHL, cultural heritage landscape, in a way that is contrary to the conservation plan for the property. And so the conservation plan is very important in the ongoing protection and conservation of these types of properties within the town. Oh my goodness. Wow. And just backing up, let me find where we are here. Okay. The other parts of the conservation plan bylaw include a section on approval and amendment, on assessment of the condition of these protected heritage properties with cultural heritage landscapes, how to deal with proposals to alter protected heritage properties, how the conservation plans will be enforced, and then the last section which talks about conflicts, paramountcy, and other miscellaneous items that do need to be addressed in these town bylaws. And so that's my very high-level overview of the bylaw. And as I mentioned, at the end of this presentation, if there are questions specifically about the bylaw, I'll probably call on Mr. Perlin to help me answer those as well. Okay. Now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the contents of the conservation plan for Glen Abbey. The purpose of this conservation plan is to guide future alterations that are likely to affect the heritage attributes of the property, which will then ensure the conservation of Glen Abbey as a significant cultural heritage landscape. So the conservation plan includes a few things. It includes descriptions of the alterations that are exempt from heritage permit approval. We refer to those as Category A works. It includes a description of those alterations that would require heritage permit approval, which we further describe as Category B alterations and Category C alterations. The difference between those two would be that Category B alterations are intended to be addressed at a staff level by the Director of Planning Services or their designate, And Category C alterations are those that would go directly to the Heritage Oakville Advisory Committee to review and to council for final consideration. Noting again that Category B alterations, those that fall under the staff category, if there are alterations proposed that are not supported by Heritage Planning staff, or sorry, the designate of the Director of Planning Services, those would automatically go forward to the Heritage Oakville Advisory Committee and to Council for final approval. So staff are not given the ability to refuse or to deny alterations, but if they can't support something that is technically supposed to be a Category B alteration, it will go to Council for final approval following Heritage Oakville review. The conservation plan also contains two guidelines that come in the form of two different checklists, and I'll talk about those in just a second, as well as a condition assessment of the heritage attributes of the cultural heritage landscape of Glen Abbey. What we feel is important to note is that the conservation plan is not a maintenance plan for Glen Abbey, nor is it considered an operational or business management plan. Maintenance, which we mean to be routine, non-destructive actions that preserve the existing form and operations, are exempt from town heritage review. And so those are described again as Category A actions. Other activities, including temporary installations, are also exempt from heritage review and fall into the Category A designation as well, because they would not affect Glen Abbey's heritage attributes. So talking a little bit more about the two checklists, the first checklist in the draft conservation plan before you this evening is a guidelines checklist that integrates these key aspects of the plan. So it talks about all of the described heritage attributes that we listed in our notice of intention to designate. That's set out in section 2.3. It divides the guidelines into individual conservation areas, and that's simply to give us an easier way to look at the plan and to understand the different ways that the property is being used and functions, as well as looking at the property as a whole. Generally speaking, it gives priority to preservation over rehabilitation, and so those would be alterations that have the least impact on the heritage value of the property. Rehabilitation can sometimes have a larger impact. It is anticipated that an applicant for a Category B or C alteration would complete the checklist as part of the submission to the town, and then it would also, town staff would also go over that checklist as well. But it requires both the applicant and staff to consider two important questions. Is the guideline relevant to the proposed alteration? And if it is relevant, is the proposed alteration consistent with the guideline? And so I've just included a small sample of what's in the conservation plan on the slide here before you today. The second checklist refers back to the heritage values of the property, and it requires that the town have before it the information on whether or not the proposed alteration affects the cultural heritage value of Glen Abbey, as described in the notice of intention to designate. So what this checklist requires is an answer to the question as to whether or not the proposed alteration will have a positive impact, a negative impact, or no effect at all. That's how you use the checklist, by using a P, an N, or a nil as you go through the entire checklist to review the proposed alteration. So, over the past few months, we've been working very hard on preparing this draft conservation plan, and we have assembled a team of experts, both internal and external. The team managed to get a draft together for release in November, and these draft copies for preliminary review and comment were provided to the property owner, to Golf Canada, and to our focus group. So our focus group was made up of representatives that had golf experience and heritage conservation experience, and included the supervisor of a heritage designated golf course outside of Oakville, a board member from the NGCOA, which is the National Golf Course Owners Association, and several members of the Heritage Oakville Advisory Committee to speak from the heritage conservation viewpoint. These meetings were held in late November. We did also invite the property owners to attend a meeting, and unfortunately they were unable to attend that meeting. So, following the feedback that we received from our focus group and our meeting with Golf Canada, as well as continued and lengthy discussion with the conservation plan team, the draft was put forward, preliminary draft was revised and is now the draft that you see before you today. And so what is going on next is, obviously we're at number 1 here, the Special Planning and Development Council meeting on December the 12th, but we recognize that we want a lot more public comment and feedback on this draft conservation plan and also on the conservation plan bylaw as well. And so both of these things will be presented to the Heritage Oakville Advisory Committee at their meeting on December the 19th for their review and comment. While that is a public meeting and anyone is welcome to attend, we've also made arrangements to hold a public open house and information meeting on January the 10th, 2018. So pretty much first thing after we get back in the new year. And that will provide the general public with the opportunity to come in and learn about the conservation plan and the bylaws that we're putting forward and ask any questions about them as well. We then anticipate that recommendations will be back before the Planning and Development Council on January the 30th of 2018, and that will include the Cultural Heritage Landscape Conservation Plan bylaw, the Cultural Heritage Landscape Conservation Plan for Glen Abbey, the Site-Specific Zoning Bylaw Amendment, the Cultural Heritage Special Policy Area Official Plan Amendment, and other town bylaws to enhance heritage protection as well. And so I have included both recommendations, both from the conservation plan bylaw report, that number 1, that the draft bylaw distributed today to regulate conservation plans for cultural heritage landscapes be received, and that staff engage in public consultation on the proposed bylaw together with any amendments to existing bylaws required to enhance heritage protection in the town, and report to council in the first quarter of 2018. Similarly, the conservation plan recommendation from the first report is simply that the draft cultural heritage landscape conservation plan for the Glen Abbey property dated December 2017 be received. And as I stated, we're more than happy to take questions from members of council and to receive the feedback from any of the members of public who are with us this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much for such a nice report. Council, do you have questions on either 1 or 2 for Susan Shepherd? Councillor Ilger.
Yeah, just one question. And the draft copies that were given out, you gave it to the property owners, you gave it to Golf Canada, and what was the third group?
Sorry, the focus group participants?
The focus group.
Yes.
So now, I'm just trying to. So Golf Canada then met with you to discuss?
Yes.
An
earlier draft of what you see before you tonight. It was
right.
Our very first kick at the can, really.
Now, the property owners, do we know they received it, or?
Yes, they received it.
Okay, that's all I wanted. Thank you.
All right. If there's no more from here, are there members of the public with information for council on item number 1, which is the Cultural Heritage Landscape Conservation Plan, and the action contemplated by council is to receive that information? Seeing none, Councillor Elgar, would you like to move receipt?
Absolutely would move receipt of this item. Thank you.
Not a recorded vote.
Okay.
All in favor? That's carried. All right. Number 2. Council, do you have any questions for staff on the proposed draft Cultural Heritage Landscape Conservation Plan bylaw? Are there members of the public with information for council on the proposed draft Cultural Heritage Landscape Conservation bylaw? Or will you be reserving your right to comment in the public consultation? It's good of you to be here, though. Thank you very much. Council, Councillor Elgar?
I would move receipt of this report also, please.
Okay, it's moved by Councillor Elgar that the draft bylaw distributed at the meeting on December 12th to regulate conservation plans for cultural heritage landscapes be received, and 2, that staff engage in public consultation on the proposed bylaw, together with any amendments to existing bylaws required to enhance heritage protection in the town, and report to council in the first quarter of 2018. Shall I put the vote? All in favor? And that is carried. Thank you, everyone. Now, if we give our attention to Leslie Gilwoods, she will summarize the report you've been provided on the proposed town-initiated official plan amendment for cultural heritage special policy areas, including Glen Abbey Golf Course. And I will bathe my rusty voice.
Good evening, everybody. Through our consideration of appropriate implementation measures arising from the Cultural Heritage Landscape Assessment of the Glen Abbey Golf Course, we are proposing an official plan amendment in addition to the zoning bylaw amendment I presented to you last week. The information report about the proposed OPA is on page 117 of the addendum agenda package. And to be clear, this is not the statutory public meeting for the proposed OPA. Notice will be issued Thursday about the related public information meeting, which will be on January 10th, and the statutory public meeting, which will be January 30th. As you've heard before, the provincial policy statement, the 2017 growth plan, and the town's livable Oakville plan all require the conservation of significant cultural heritage landscapes. And work on the town's cultural heritage landscape strategy implementation has been ongoing since 2014. Just so we're all on the same page, conserved is defined in the provincial policy statement and the growth plan to mean the identification, protection, management, and use of built heritage resources, cultural heritage landscapes, and archaeological resources in a manner that ensures their cultural heritage value or interest is retained under the Ontario Heritage Act. Here we have the Glen Abbey property, also known as 1333 Dorval Drive. The property was included in the Phase 1 inventory of the town's cultural heritage landscape strategy implementation, which was endorsed by Council in February 2016. The interim control bylaw, which applies to the Glen Abbey property and expires January 31st of next year, provided for the completion of the town's urban structure review, as well as the cultural heritage landscape assessment of the Glen Abbey property. Sue's already reviewed this context. As you know, the assessment was completed under Phase 2, and as a result, Council recognized 1333 Dorval Drive as a significant cultural heritage landscape and directed staff to move into Phase 3, implementation of protection measures. The notice of intention to designate the property was issued in August, and we are proceeding with a number of other implementation measures. The existing official plan for the Glen Abbey property is shown here, the official plan designations. The property is currently designated private open space and natural area. The bullseye symbol on this map indicate that the property is subject to site-specific exception policies. The exception policies are in Part E of the plan, and they're quoted in the staff report. Section 27.3.4 of the plan applies to the portion within the private open space area, and it allows for additional uses related to the principal golf course use. Section 27.3.5 applies to the portion of the property within the natural area designation, and it provides for the restoration of the golf course within the valley if it's damaged by a natural disaster. The proposed official plan amendment would maintain the land use designations, delete the exception policies, apply a special policy area overlay or some method of identifying it as a special policy area, and provide new policies in Section 26 of the plan. More specifically, the purpose of the proposed official plan amendment is to provide the framework to recognize special policy areas for heritage conservation districts and cultural heritage landscapes, and to provide policies to support the protection, management, and use of the Glen Abbey Golf Course cultural heritage landscape in a manner that ensures its cultural heritage value or interest is retained. The effect of the proposed official plan amendment would be to add a new subsection entitled Heritage Conservation Districts and Cultural Heritage Landscapes to Section 26 of the plan. That's a special policy area section. And to identify a new special policy area applying to the Glen Abbey Golf Course on Schedule H and Schedule I of the plan. It would also add new policies for the Glen Abbey Golf Course Cultural Heritage Landscape to Section 26 and delete the existing site-specific exception policies. This table shows the timeline for the proposed town-initiated protection measures under the Planning Act only for the Glen Abbey Golf Course Cultural Heritage Landscape. So as you see highlighted is today's meeting, the information report about the proposed official plan amendment. Coming up, we have consultation with the Heritage Oakville Advisory Committee about both the proposed official plan amendment and the zoning bylaw amendment, and then there'll be an opportunity for public consultation January 10th at the public information meeting, an open house, and then again at the Planning and Development Council meeting on January 30th. As Sue mentioned, we're coordinating our efforts, and you'll see not just the Planning Act protection measures, but also the other items on the go. So that concludes my presentation. The recommendation is that the report be received.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Councillor Hutchins has a question for you.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, good. On page 123, I'm talking about, in addition, the following site-specific exception. Livable Oakville 27.3.4 applies to the portion of the subjected property designated private open space. And there's a whole series of things, starting at A, a hotel conference center with necessary facilities, B, banquet dining facilities. You do have a limiting on C, you said limited retail, and you have administrative offices and facilities. Why isn't the limited added to the others? I mean, how do we need a definition to I mean, could they build a Trump hotel there, for instance, and like they built as big as they wish to do?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the councillor is quoting the existing site-specific policy, which provides for additional uses related to the principal golf course use. That's a long-standing policy. We're proposing to delete it and replace it with new words in the draft official plan, and that gets further implemented through the proposed zoning bylaw amendment as it applies to this property. So we'll certainly look at how those additional uses are framed and if there needs to be any tweaking to those.
Thank you. I was just a little concerned it was left a bit loose.
Any other members of council with questions? Are there members of the public with information for council on this matter? Seeing none. Councillor Elgar.
Pleased to move receipt of this report.
Thank you, Councillor. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. All right, Council, I call your attention to new business, item C1. And I believe that the recommendation that's indicated here that could be moved in public and continue to keep down the amount of time this council spends in camera is that the recommendation contained in the confidential report dated December 12th, 2017 from the legal department entitled Legal Update, re Glen Abbey Golf Course, be approved. Councillor Elgar, would you like to move this?
Your Worship, I would be pleased to move this. I've read it, and I think there's no need to go on camera unless somebody has some specific questions. It's very straightforward what the intent is here. Thank you.
Yes, I got to congratulate staff on a very straightforward and clear report. Shall I put the vote? All those in favor? And that carries. Thank you, Council. Now, we need a motion to rise and report to Council. Councillor Knoll, thank you. All in favor? And that carries. I rise and report the Committee of the Whole has met and made recommendations on discussion items 1, 2, and 3, and new business item C1 is noted by the clerk. And this report needs a mover and a seconder. Councillor Grant, thank you. Councillor Chisholm, thank you. All in favor? And that's carried. Council, we need a mover and seconder for the confirmatory bylaw. Councillor Duddick and Councillor Robinson. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. That completes the agenda and thus the meeting. It's been great working with you, and we are adjourned.